Before we begin tonight, I want to ask you something. When you can't sleep, when you wake at 2 or 3 inches in the morning and the house is quiet and the world is dark and your mind won't stop, do you ever feel like that waking, that specific waking at that specific hour is somehow right? Like your body's doing something it was supposed to do? Tonight, I'm going to tell you something that might change the way you feel about those nights forever. Drop a comment below. Tell me, what time do you usually wake up in the night? Because the answer might tell you something about 50,000 years ago and about exactly who you still are. Opening personal moment, I want to tell you about a night. Not last night, not recently. A night from about 4 years ago, I was camping alone, no phone signal, no artificial light for kilometers. And there I woke up at some point in the middle of the night, not from a sound, not from discomfort, just awake, fully awake. And the darkness outside the tent was absolute. The kind of darkness you forget exists until you're in it. And I lay there for a while, listening, really listening, the way you can only listen when there's nothing to look at. An owl, far away, the movement of something small in the leaves nearby, vent moving through grass, sounds I don't normally hear because I'm normally not awake for them. And I felt something I didn't have a name for, a kind of ease, a settling, like something in me recognized this, like some part of my brain older than my name, older than my language, older than everything I think of as myself, was saying, yes, this is the right thing. Awake in the dark, listening, paying attention. This is what you're for. That feeling, that specific feeling is what this documentary is about. Not history, not archaeology, but the version of you that is older than history, the version of you that existed before civilization, before agriculture, before writing, before any of the things that make you who you are in the daytime. The prehistoric version, the one that woke up in the dark and listened for 50,000 years, before you had a bed or a house or a street light outside your window. That version of you is still there, inside the modern one. And tonight, I want to tell you about it. I want to tell you how you actually lived. Your deepest ancestors, 50,000 years ago, not in broad strokes, not in textbook summaries, in the actual detail, the fire, the food, the sleep, the fear, the love, the extraordinary richness of a life lived entirely in the present, entirely in contact with the world, without walls, without screens, without any distance from the raw experience of being alive. So close your eyes, or don't. Get comfortable. And let me take you back. Part one, who they were. The humans of 50,000 years ago. First, let me tell you who we're talking about, because the popular image of prehistoric humans is wrong, not slightly wrong, fundamentally wrong. The people who lived 50,000 years ago were not brutes. They were not primitive in any meaningful sense. They were not proto-humans, not halfway evolved, not waiting to become us. They were us, anatomically modern Homo sapiens, the same species, the same brain, the same capacity for language, for abstract thought, for empathy, for love, for ral, for humor, for art, for the full range of what we call human experience. If you took a baby born 50,000 years ago and raised it in a modern city, speaking a modern language, going to modern schools, it would grow up indistinguishable from anyone alive today. Its brain was the same. Its capacity for learning was the same, its emotional range, its ability to reason, its ability to love and grieve and wonder, all the same. The difference between us and them was entirely cultural, entirely technological, not biological, not neurological. The hardware was identical. Only the software was different. By 50,000 years ago, modern humans had been in existence for perhaps 250,000 to 300,000 years. But something happened around 50,000 to 70,000 years ago. Something that archaeologists sometimes call the behavioral revolution or the Great Leap Forward. A sudden, or relatively sudden, by geological standards, explosion of cultural and technological complexity. Symbolic art, advanced tools, long-distance trade, personal ornamentation, ritual burial, musical instruments, the evidence of complex social life, suddenly visible in the archaeological record. What triggered it? The theories vary. A genetic mutation affecting language, a climatic event that forced behavioral adaptation, a population size reaching a threshold above which cultural innovation could accumulate and be transmitted. We don't know exactly, but we know the result. By 50,000 years ago, humans were making art, wearing jewelry, performing rituals, burying their dead with grave goods, living in organized social groups with rules and relationships and histories. These were not simple creatures. They were complex, social, creative, curious, in every way that matters, fully human. The population, 50,000 years ago, there were perhaps 500,000 to a million humans on Earth. Maybe slightly more. To put that in perspective, the population of a medium-sized city today spread across an entire planet. Small bands, moving through vast territories, rarely encountering strangers, knowing personally every single person in their social world. A social world that rarely exceeded 150 people, Dunbar's number. The cognitive limit on the number of stable social relationships a human brain can maintain, that number 150 is interesting because it appears again and again in the size of traditional hunter-gatherer bands, in the size of villages throughout history, in the size of effective military units, in the size of many modern social groups that function cohesively. The human brain was built for a social world of about 150 people. That's what 50,000 years ago looked like. Not millions, not thousands. People you knew by name, by face, by personality, by history. Every single person in your world. Known personally. Part 2, the band, how they lived together, the basic unit of social life 50,000 years ago was the band. A band was typically 20 to 50 people. A few families, usually related, moving together through a territory. Think about what that means. You know, everyone, you've always known everyone. You were born into a group of 30 people, and you have lived with those same people your whole life. You know their voices before you see them. You know their moods, their habits, their skills, who can track a deer, who can find water, who tells the stories at night, who gets angry too quickly, who always knows where north is. You know, all of this about every person in your world. There was no privacy, not in the modern sense. In a band of 30 people living together, sleeping together, moving together, everything was visible. Every relationship, every conflict, every moment of grief, or joy. You could not be anonymous. You could not be alone in a crowd because there was no crowd, only the band. And the band knew everything about you. As you knew everything about them, relationships were everything, not in a sentimental sense. In a survival sense, your relationships were your survival network. In a world without hospitals, without police, without insurance, the people around you were the only safety net. If you were injured and couldn't hunt, the band fed you. If you were sick, the band cared for you. If your children needed protecting, the band protected them. If you died, the band raised your children. Your relationships, the quality of your relationships, the extent to which you were trusted, liked, valued, determined whether you lived or died, whether your children lived, whether your genes continued. This is why humans are so deeply social. Why social pain, rejection, exclusion, loneliness hurts the way it does. It was once a matter of survival. To be excluded from the band was to die. Slowly, alone, without the network that made life possible. The band was not a democracy, not exactly, and not a dictatorship either. More like a consensus with informal leaders, people whose judgment was trusted, whose skills were recognized, who had the respect of the group, not because they were born to lead, not because they had wealth or inherited power, but because they were genuinely good at things, tracking, healing, remembering, mediating conflict, telling the stories that made sense of the world. Leadership was earned continually through demonstrated competence and trustworthiness, and it could be lost. A leader who made poor decisions, who was dishonest, who took more than their share, would lose influence quietly, not through election, through the withdrawal of trust, through the subtle realignment of the group, away from them, towards someone else, a social process, slow but effective equality, not perfect equality, not in any idealized sense, but more equal than almost any society in history. Resources were shared. Food was distributed not according to who worked hardest, but according to who needed it. The elderly, the sick, the young, the pregnant, they were fed, even if they couldn't contribute, because they had contributed, because they would contribute, because they were part of the band. And the band was not a business arrangement. It was a family, imperfect, sometimes volatile, but built on the understanding that everyone's life depended on everyone else's. Anthropologists who study modern hunter-gatherer societies, the few that still exist or existed until recently, describe a culture of what they call demand sharing. If you have something and someone needs it, they can ask, and you give it, not as charity, not as a transaction, but as an expectation, as a fundamental social norm. The worst thing you can be in a hunter-gatherer society is stingy. The most praised quality is generosity, not strategic generosity, not calculated generosity, but the deep, instinctive generosity of someone who understands that what goes around comes around, that in a world without storage, without banks, without any way to preserve wealth, the only bank is the goodwill of the people around you. The food you share today is the food they share with you tomorrow, when you are the one who has nothing. Part 3. The day from dawn to dark. What did the day actually look like? 50,000 years ago? Not the highlights, the ordinary, the texture of the daily experience. Dumb, The light came through no windows, no curtains, no walls. The light came directly into your eyes before you were fully awake. The sky changing from black to deep blue to gray to pink to gold. And the sounds, the birds starting, first one, then another, then dozens, the dawn chorus. Not as a background noise you half register, but as the actual signal, the signal that the night is over, that the safe period of the camp is ending, that the world is becoming active again. And so must you. You slept on the ground, or close to it, perhaps on a bed of leaves and grass, perhaps on an animal skin, in climates where it was warm, perhaps nothing at all. The ground beneath you, the sky above you, or the low canopy of a simple shelter made of branches or hides, enough to block the rain, not enough to block the sounds. The sounds of the world were always present, always audible. Sleeping in nature means sleeping with the sounds of nature. And your sleeping brain, your prehistoric sleeping brain, was trained to process those sounds automatically. A distant lion, the alarm calls of birds, the rustle that was just wind, the rustle that was something else. Your sleeping brain knew the difference, was trained to know the difference over thousands of generations. Waking was not the abrupt, alarmed experience of a modern alarm clock. It was gradual, responsive. Your body woke with the light, with the temperature, with the sounds. Your cortisol, the hormone that triggers morning alertness, rose with the dawn light, not with an artificial alarm, with the actual dawn. Your body was synchronized with the day, with the planet, with the rhythm of the Earth's rotation, in a way that most modern humans' bodies cannot be. Morning was the practical time, the time for finding food, the time for making things, for maintaining tools, for tending to the business of survival. The men and older boys often hunted, not every day. Large game was not hunted every day. The energy expenditure was too great. The success rate was too variable. Most food came from gathering, from the work of women and children and older men, from plants, from tubers, from berries, from nuts, from insects, from small animals, from eggs, from anything edible that could be found. Gathering was not random, not wandering and picking up whatever was there. It was systematic, based on knowledge, detailed, sophisticated, hard-won knowledge of what was edible and what was not, of when things ripened, where they grew, how to prepare them, how to detoxify the ones that were mildly toxic raw but safe when cooked, how to find tubers underground, how to recognize the plants that indicated water nearby, how to find the areas of concentrated nuts, how to tell from the behavior of birds where there were berries. This knowledge was not written down. It was learned directly from the people who already knew it. From childhood, girls learned from their mothers and aunts and grandmothers. Boys learned from their fathers and uncles and grandfathers, learning through doing, through watching, through being corrected, through years of accumulated experience, a knowledge system as sophisticated as anything in a modern university, but transmitted entirely through relationship, entirely through demonstration, entirely through the lived experience of doing it. The women gathering, this is worth sitting with, because in the popular imagination of prehistory, the men hunt, the women wait. That is not what the evidence shows. The evidence from modern hunter-gatherer societies and from isotope analysis of ancient bones and from archaeological evidence of plant processing shows that women's labor provided the majority of the calories in most hunter-gatherer groups. Perhaps 60 to 80%, the large game hunted by men was important, highly valued, a source of protein and fat, a focus of ritual and prestige, but it was unreliable, variable. Most days, it was the women's gathering that fed the band. Women were the primary food providers. In a world where food was the first priority, that was the most important work. And women's work was not just gathering, it was knowledge management. The knowledge of plants, their locations, their seasonality, their preparation, their medicinal uses. This knowledge was primarily held by women, transmitted by women, and later a book called A Day's Close, Night in Times Past, in which he documented something extraordinary. He had spent years combing through historical records, diaries, letters, court records, medical texts, literary sources from medieval and early modern Europe, and what he found was this. For most of human history, until the late 17th or early 18th century, people did not sleep in one continuous block. They slept in two. The first sleep, beginning shortly after dark, lasting for 3 to 4 hours. Then a waking, a period of consciousness, lasting for 1 to 2 hours, sometimes longer. Then a second sleep, lasting until dawn. 2 sleeps, with a waking in between. This pattern appears so consistently in the historical record that Ekirch concludes it was the norm. Not for some people, for most people in the pre-industrial world, before electric light, before the pressures of industrial schedules, before the idea that you should sleep for 8 uninterrupted hours became a medical standard. People slept in 2. What did they do in between? The records describe it. They got up. Sometimes, more often, they stayed in bed. They talked with their sleeping partners. They thought. They prayed. In religious contexts, the middle of the night was considered a sacred time, when the connection to God was clearest, when dreams could be interpreted, when intuitions were strongest. They had sex. The records specifically note this. The period between first and second sleep was considered favorable for conception because the woman was relaxed, not tense, not worried, but at rest in a way that the deliberate act of sex before sleep couldn't quite achieve. They dealt with worries. The night watch was a time when concerns surfaced, when the mind worked over problems, not anxiously, but thoughtfully, in the particular state of calm alertness that occupies that space. The anthropologist Carol Worthman, who has studied sleep across multiple cultures, describes the sleep of hunter-gatherer peoples, and it does not look like what we call normal sleep. It does not look like 8 hours of uninterrupted unconsciousness. It looks fluid, flexible, responsive. People sleep when they are tired, wake when they need to, nap in the afternoon, wake in the night, have a period of drowsy socializing by the dying fire, drift back to sleep, wake again at dawn. Sleep is not a separate activity. Bracketed by clear transitions, it is woven into life, into the day, into the night, into the rhythm of the body, responding to the body's actual signals, rather than a schedule imposed from outside, and the night waking the 2 a.m. waking that so many modern people experience, that they lie awake worrying about, that they take sleep medication to prevent, that they Google how to stop waking in the middle of the night, is probably not a sleep disorder. It is probably a memory, a biological echo of the way your ancestors always slept. In two, your body remembering what your schedule forgot. The first sleep, deep, restorative, processing the day, consolidating memories. The waking, alert, present, in the particular clarity of the middle of the night. Then the second sleep, the dream-rich REM sleep, the sleep of vivid dreaming, of processing emotions, of the mind working through what the body has felt. Some researchers have suggested that the biphasic sleep pattern is the natural human pattern, and that the expectation of 8 continuous hours is a cultural artifact, an artifact of electric light, which extended the day, pushed back the first sleep, compressed the two into one, and created a culture of sleep deprivation, because the one sleep is not quite as restorative as the two were, not quite as natural. When you wake at 2 a.m. and lie there, mind moving, the quiet of the house around you, the darkness, the particular quality of the attention, you are not failing at sleep. You are succeeding at something older, something your body has always known how to do, something it has been doing for 50,000 years or much longer. Part 6, the night, what the dark meant. The dark, this is important because we have forgotten what the dark was, what it actually felt like to live in it. There was no light pollution anywhere on Earth before approximately 200 years ago. The light that fell on the human world at night came from the sky, from the moon, from the stars, on moonless nights, on overcast nights. The dark was absolute, truly absolute, the darkness of a closed room, a sealed cave, a darkness in which you could not see your hand in front of your face. This was the normal state, every night, for all of human history, until very recently. The stars, every human alive 50,000 years ago, in any part of the world, knew the stars intimately, the way we know streets or faces. The sky was their clock, their calendar, their compass, their map. They knew which stars rose and set with which seasons, which told them when the rains were coming, which told them when the migrations would begin, which showed them north, which showed them south. The stars were not decorations. They were tools, essential tools that everyone used every night. The Milky Way, every clear night, for every human who ever lived, until the invention of electric light. The Milky Way was visible, a blazing arc of light across the entire sky, thousands of individual stars visible to the naked eye, tens of thousands more as a diffuse glow. The center of the galaxy itself, a bright concentration in Sagittarius, visible, available every night for all of human history. Think about what that meant. Every story, every myth, every piece of traditional astronomy, every navigation technique, every seasonal marker, everything was done under that sky, under that blaze of stars, under the Milky Way that most people alive today have never seen, not once in their entire lives, because the light of cities covers it. We have lost the night sky, and with it, something we cannot fully name, but whose loss leaves a strange absence. The night was not safe. This is also important. The dark was not just beautiful, it was dangerous. The predators that could harm you were more active at night. Lions hunt at night. Leopards are especially dangerous at night. Here in us, other humans, the dark concealed threats. Your eyes, excellent in daylight, were much less effective in the dark. The balance of advantage shifted at night from you to the things that hunted you. This is why fire was so important. This is why the sleeping arrangements of prehistoric bands were what they were, not isolated, not private, together, huddled, with the fire between them and the dark, with every adult a potential guardian, with the collective vigilance of the group, distributed so no one had to bear it alone. You slept surrounded by people, by the people who would wake if something threatened, by the people whose movements you could hear, whose breathing you could hear. And that sound, the breathing of other humans nearby, was not an intrusion, not a disturbance. It was safety. It was comfort. It was the specific, ancient, deep comfort of not being alone in the dark. The body knows this. Even now, even in a world where the threats of the dark have largely been removed, the body still responds to being alone in the dark with a heightened arousal, a slight increase in cortisol, a slight increase in alertness, a slight increase in the urge to listen, to check, to be sure. This is not a phobia. This is biology. The biology of an animal that was, for millions of years, genuinely threatened by the dark. By what moved in it, the vigilance is written into the hardware, and no amount of intellectual reassurance fully removes it, because the body knows things the mind forgets. Part 7. Food. What they ate and how. Let me take you through the food, because the food of 50,000 years ago was extraordinarily different from what we eat. And yet, our bodies still remember it, still respond to it differently, still crave some of what we ate, still struggle with some of what we now eat, that our ancestors never encountered. The diet of hunter-gatherers varied enormously by location, by season, by latitude. A band living in tropical Africa ate very differently from a band living in Siberia, or in coastal Australia, or in the Amazon basin. The human diet 50,000 years ago was not one diet. It was hundreds of diets, each adapted to a specific place, a specific season, a specific suite of available resources. What they shared: variety, enormous variety. A modern diet, even a varied modern diet, is built from a tiny number of species. Perhaps 20 species of plant and animal provide 90% of the calories in the global food supply. A hunter-gatherer diet might include 50, 100, 200 different species, depending on the season, depending on what was available. Root vegetables from dozens of different plants, 3 berries, leaves, seeds, nuts, insects, honey, eggs, fish, small mammals, reptiles, birds, large mammals. Each species with its own nutrient profile, its own fiber content, its own secondary compounds. The gut microbiome of a hunter-gatherer was exposed to this enormous variety and responded with its own enormous variety. A gut microbiome of extraordinary richness, adapted to processing dozens of different foods, with thousands of different species of bacteria, fungal species, viral species, a complex ecosystem. The gut microbiome of modern Western humans is dramatically impoverished. Compared to hunter-gatherer populations studied today, some populations have 50% fewer gut microbiome species than traditional hunter-gatherer populations. The gut that evolved over millions of years to process an enormously diverse diet is now processing an enormously narrow diet, and the consequences are becoming apparent in the rates of inflammatory disease, autoimmune disease, mental health conditions, allergies that are dramatically higher in industrialized populations than in traditional populations. The gut microbiome matters enormously, and we have profoundly disrupted it in a few generations. Fiber. Hunter-gatherers ate enormous amounts of dietary fiber. Estimates suggest 100 to 150 grams per day. The recommended daily intake in most Western countries is 25 to 38 grams. The average actual intake in the United States is about 15 grams. The gut microbiome ferments fiber, produces short-chain fatty acids, which feed the cells of the gut lining, which regulate the immune system, which produce neurotransmitters, which influence mood, which influence brain function. A gut fed 150 grams of fiber per day produces very different signals to the brain, to the immune system, to the body as a whole, than a gut fed 15 grams. The body is not getting what it evolved to receive. The hunt, the large game hunt, this was not the daily food source, but it was the most ritually significant, the most socially significant, the most energetically expensive, and the most celebrated. A hunt for a large animal, an aurochs, a mammoth, a wild horse, a deer required days of preparation, days of tracking, reading the ground, the tracks, the droppings, the broken branches, the smell, the knowledge of where the animal would be, at what time, in what season, what its behavior would be, how it would respond to different approaches. All of this was knowledge. Artworm transmitted through practice, through the experience of following someone who already knew, the apprenticeship of hunting from childhood with experienced adults, learning to read the world the way a book is read, with the same depth, the same nuance, the same complexity, the kill with a spear at close range or with a spear thrower, the atlatl, a device that extends the arm and increases the velocity of a thrown spear, invented at least 17,500 years ago, possibly much earlier, a mechanical advantage that allowed spears to be thrown with the force and penetrating power needed to bring down large prey. At 20 to 30 meters, the kill was dangerous. Animals don't cooperate. A wounded deer or boar can be extremely dangerous. Hunters were injured regularly. The archaeological evidence from the bones of ancient hunters shows healed fractures, healed wounds, evidence of violence from animals and from other humans. The hunt was not a pastoral activity. It was dangerous, skilled, physically demanding work, but the return to camp with a large kill was something entirely different. Evidence from studies of modern hunter-gatherers and from ethnographic records describes what happens when a large animal is brought back. The excitement, the celebration, the feast, the distribution of meat to everyone in the band, including those who did not hunt, the elderly, the sick, the children, everyone ate, and the distribution had specific rules. In many traditional societies, the hunter did not distribute his own kill. Others distributed it for him to prevent any display of pride, to prevent the accumulation of social debt, to keep the distribution egalitarian. A meat feast was a community event, not a personal triumph. Honey. I want to spend a moment on honey, because honey was extraordinary. To a hunter-gatherer, sugar was rare. The constant source of sweet food was fruit, which was seasonal, which had to be found and eaten quickly before it spoiled. Honey was different. Honey was concentrated, preserved, sweet, dense with calories. And the challenge of obtaining it, finding a bee's nest, often in a tree, often high up, often requiring exposure to thousands of stings. The extraction of honey was a significant event, depicted in rock art across the world, from Spain to South Africa to Australia. Honey figures in the mythology of many traditional cultures. The first sweet thing, the gift of the forest, the thing worth risking pain for, the body's response to sweetness, the pleasure of sugar on the tongue, the dopamine release, the urge to have more. This evolved in a world where sweet food was rare and valuable, where the sweetest thing you were likely to taste was fruit, or occasionally honey. The body was designed to pursue sweetness because sweetness was good. Sweetness meant calories, meant energy, meant survival. In a world where calories were uncertain, the pursuit of sweetness was adaptive, essential. Now, in a world where sugar is cheap and ubiquitous, the same response, the same urge, is maladaptive, driving overconsumption of something the body was never designed to receive in such quantities. The cravings you feel for sweet things are ancient. They were built for a different world. Part 8. Movement. The body built for motion. The body, the physical body of a human 50,000 years ago was remarkably different from the modern body in one specific way, not in form, not in structure, but in use. Hunter-gatherers walk. On average, modern studies of contemporary hunter-gatherer groups show daily walking distances of 6 to 16 kilometers. For men, often more. For women gathering with children, perhaps 4 to 9 kilometers. But the character of the movement is different from modern walking. It is not the sustained, even pace of exercise walking. It is varied, walking, running, stopping, crouching, climbing, swimming, carrying, digging, throwing, the full range of human movement over varied terrain. Bone density. Studies of prehistoric human bones show substantially higher bone density than modern humans, much higher, comparable in some cases to modern-day marathon runners or professional athletes. In every bone, not just the weight-bearing bones, all of them, the bones of people who use their bodies constantly, fully, in every direction for their entire lives. From childhood, when children spend hours climbing, digging, running, playing, without restriction, without the concern for safety that structures modern children's play, with full access to the physical world. Sitting, or rather the absence of sustained sitting. Hunter-gatherers do rest. They spend significant time resting, particularly in the heat of the midday. But the resting posture is not sitting in a chair, it is squatting or sitting on the ground or lying down. The chair, specifically the chair that keeps the hip at 90 degrees. The pelvis slightly posteriorly tilted, the lower back slightly flexed, is a relatively recent invention, and one that the human spine was not designed for. The lower back pain that afflicts perhaps 80% of modern adults at some point in their lives is in part a consequence of the chair, of sitting in the posture that chairs require for hours, every day, for years. A posture the human body never occupied before chairs existed. The feet, bare feet, for most of human history, feet that gripped the ground, that responded to every surface, whose thousands of sensory nerve endings were in direct contact with the world, telling the body constantly about the surface it was on, about balance, about weight distribution, about the need to adjust. Modern shoes, especially modern supportive shoes, with padded soles, with arch support, do some of the work the foot evolved to do for itself. And in doing that work, they atrophy the muscles, the tendon, the ligaments that the foot evolved to use. The foot becomes dependent on the support it was never supposed to need. The modern human foot, enclosed in shoes from childhood, is physically weaker and structurally different from the foot of a hunter-gatherer that spent every day barefoot on every kind of terrain. The body knows the ground when it is allowed to know it. Part 9, the medicine, healing without hospitals. There was no medicine in the modern sense. No hospitals, no surgery, no antibiotics, no understanding of germ theory, no pharmaceutical drugs. And yet, people survived. Not all of them, not for very long by modern standards. Infant mortality was high. Death from injury was common. Death from infection was common. The average life expectancy, if calculated from birth, was perhaps 30 to 35 years. But that number is misleading. Because of infant mortality, a child who survived to age 15 had a very different life expectancy. A person who reached adulthood in good health could expect to live to 60 or 70 or longer. The bones of old individuals with healed fractures, with the wear of age, with evidence of arthritis, appear in the archaeological record. These people lived long in a world without modern medicine, because the diseases that kill most modern people, cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, many cancers, are diseases of the modern lifestyle, largely absent in hunter-gatherer populations, living as they were designed to live. The medicine that did exist was botanical. Herbs, roots, barks, resins, fungi, the same material knowledge that kept the world running, applied to healing. Willow bark containing salicylates, the compounds in aspirin for pain and fever, garlic with genuine antimicrobial properties for infections, plantain leaves for wound healing, clay for gastrointestinal complaints, honey for wound care with genuine antibacterial properties. The list goes on and goes deep. The traditional pharmacopoeia, the medical knowledge encoded in the plant world, was real, empirically tested across thousands of generations. Many modern drugs are derived from traditional plant medicines: aspirin from willow bark, quinine from cinchona bark, morphine from the opium poppy, artemisinin, a key antimalarial drug from Artemisia, a plant used in traditional Chinese medicine for 2,000 years. The knowledge was not superstition, it was science. Without the vocabulary of science, the healers, every band had someone, perhaps several people, who specialized in healing, who knew the plants, who knew the techniques, who knew how to set a broken bone, how to clean and close a wound, how to manage labor and delivery. These were the doctors, the herbalists, the midwives, and in many cultures, they were also the ritual specialists, the shamans, because healing and the sacred were not separate. The body and the spirit were not separate. The medicine was also the prayer. The prayer was also the medicine. The shaman, this word comes from the Evenki people of Siberia, but the role it describes appears in virtually every human culture, on every continent, in every era. The person who can travel between worlds, between the world of the living and the world of the spirits, between the visible and the invisible, who can negotiate with the forces that cause disease, that cause disaster, that cause bad luck, and bring back what was lost, or take away what was harmful. The shaman, in some traditions, entered altered states of consciousness through fasting, through drumming, through dancing, through plant medicines, through extreme physical deprivation, and in those altered states, gained access to knowledge, to healing, to the invisible world. The cave paintings, some researchers believe, were made in altered states by shamans who went deep into the earth, into the most remote, most inaccessible chambers, who experienced visual phenomena under conditions of isolation, cold, darkness, oxygen deprivation, phosphenes, the geometric patterns the brain produces under altered states of consciousness, the animals they saw in visions, painted on the walls as a record, as a communication, with the powers they had encountered. This is contested, but it is a serious scholarly hypothesis taken seriously by archaeologists and neurologists alike. The art on the cave walls as a document of experiences at the boundary of consciousness, of what the shaman saw in the dark. Part 10, Death, how they faced the inevitable. Death was present, always, in a way that modern life largely conceals. The dying happened at home, with family, not in hospitals, not behind closed doors, not managed by professionals. At home, in the camp, in the presence of everyone, children died, many of them. In their first years, infant mortality was perhaps 40 to 50%. By the age of 5, almost every adult had lost a sibling, or a child, or both. Death was not an exception. It was woven into the ordinary texture of life. Everyone knew it, had witnessed it, had held it, and yet, the evidence suggests that prehistoric humans did not simply accept death, did not simply move on. They grieved. The evidence of burial, of grave goods, of red ochre, of flowers placed with the dead. These are not the acts of people indifferent to loss. They are the acts of people who felt the absence, who wanted the dead to be cared for, even in death, who believed the hope that something continued beyond the body, beyond the visible world. The earliest known deliberate burials at sites like Skullangofsir in Israel, dating to approximately 90,000 to 120,000 years ago, show humans burying their dead with care, with objects, with ochre, the meaning of the ochre, rel, the color of blood, the color of life applied to the dead, perhaps as a way of returning life to them, or of marking the transition from the living world to whatever comes next. The Shanidar cave burial in what is now Iraq, a Neanderthal, not even a modern human, but our close relative, buried about 65,000 to 70,000 years ago, with pollen, with flowers, was, so it was believed for decades, the flower burial of Shanidar IV, a Neanderthal buried on a bed of flowers. More recent analysis has questioned whether the flowers were intentional, whether the pollen might have been introduced naturally by burrowing rodents. The question is unresolved. But the fact that it was even credible, that no one laughed and said, Neanderthals don't do that, tells us something about what we now believe about the emotional and spiritual life of our closest relatives. Grief, the experience of grief, is universal, cross-cultural, present in every human society. And in some non-human animals, elephants return to the bones of their dead, touch them with their trunks, stand near them in what observers describe as something that looks like mourning. Chimpanzees have been observed carrying the bodies of dead infants for weeks after the infant has died, unable to let go. Grief is ancient, deep, perhaps older than our species. How did prehistoric humans process grief? Through ritual, through story, through the continued presence of the dead in the life of the group. In many traditional cultures, the dead are not simply gone. They become ancestors who watch over the living, who can be consulted, who can intercede, who need to be propitiated. The dead are still part of the community, still present, still mattering, just in a different form. This is not superstition. This is a profound psychological technology for managing the experience of loss, for maintaining continuity, for keeping the wisdom of the dead accessible, for making grief bearable. The ancestor is not gone. The ancestor is transformed and can still be heard in the night, in the dream, in the memory, in the story. Part 11, Children, how the young were raised. Children in a hunter-gatherer band were not segregated from adult life, from the world, from work, from death, from everything. They were present for all of it from the beginning. Infants were carried constantly, not placed in cribs, not put down, carried against the body, in a sling, on the back, on the hip, in physical contact for the majority of the first year of life, and frequently for the second and the third. This is not unique to human. It is the norm for most primates, and for all traditional human cultures studied. The infant carried against the body, feeling the warmth, hearing the heartbeat, moving with the movement of the carrier. The same rhythms experienced in the womb continued outside it. The consequences for brain development are significant. Infants who are held, who are touched, who are in physical contact show different neurological development from infants who are placed, who spend time alone, separated from their caregivers. The stress system, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, develops differently. The capacity for emotional regulation develops differently. The attachment system, the ability to form and maintain secure attachments, develops differently. A nervous system shaped by constant physical contact, constant responsiveness, is a different nervous system from one shaped by schedule-based care, by solo sleeping, by the management of infant needs through timed intervals. Children were not disciplined through punishment. In the way that word is typically understood, physical punishment was rare in most documented hunter-gatherer societies. Children were reasoned with, redirected, embarrassed, occasionally frightened by the story of a monster who took children who misbehaved, but rarely struck, because in a small band, violence is dangerous. Even small violence, it escalates, it creates grudges, it disrupts the social fabric that keeps everyone alive. The cultural norm was against harsh punishment, even of children. Children played freely for years, without schedules, without curriculum, without any structured learning program. They played, and in playing, they learned everything they needed to know: how to move through the environment, how to use tools, how to track animals, how to find plants, how to interact with other people, how to negotiate conflict, how to cooperate, how to compete. The play of children was the curriculum. The natural world was the classroom. The community was the teacher. The education began early. A 3-year-old watched how knives were made. A 5-year-old was given a small bow or a small digging stick and began to learn through imitation, through practice, without any formal instruction, just watching and doing, watching and doing, until the skill was there, until the knowledge was in the body, not just in the mind. Adolescence, the transition from child to adult, was marked in almost every human culture through ritual, the initiation, the rite of passage. Boys separated from their mothers, taken into the world of men, tested through ordeal, through deprivation, through symbolic death and rebirth, and returned as adults with new names, with new relationships, with new obligations, with new knowledge, the knowledge of what it means to be an adult in this community. With these specific responsibilities, girls' initiations were different, often tied to the first menstruation, also involving seclusion, instruction, the transmission of women's knowledge of birth, of fertility, of the specific skills and responsibilities of adult women, and reintegration into the community as an adult, as a woman with new status, with new relationships, with new authority over the specific domain of women's knowledge. These initiations were not arbitrary. They were not just tradition for tradition's sake. They served a function. They marked a clear transition from one status to another, so that the community knew and the individual knew that the transition had occurred, that new responsibilities had been assumed, that the child was now an adult in a world without birth certificates, without legal definitions of adulthood, without any external marker. The ritual created the marker. The community witnessed the transformation, and the transformation was real because the community made it real by treating the initiated person differently. From that day forward, part 12, language and thought, what was said around the fire. Language, by 50,000 years ago, language was fully developed, the full complexity of modern human language, the ability to talk about things that are not present, the past, the future, the hypothetical, the philosophical, the spiritual, all of it, in a rich, complex, grammatically sophisticated language, or languages. because there were many, many hundreds. Each band perhaps speaking a language slightly different from neighboring bands, or very different. The diversity of human language is a reflection of the long isolation of small bands over thousands of years, each developing their own way of speaking, their own vocabulary, their own grammar, their own particular music, the topics of conversation. What did people talk about? Studies of modern hunter-gatherer groups record the topics of conversation, and what emerges is something familiar, other people. By far the most common topic: who did what to whom, what they said, how they behaved, their relationships, their status, their failures, their successes. Gossip, essentially human social gossip, which is not as trivial as it sounds, because gossip is the mechanism of social control, the mechanism by which reputation is built and maintained, the mechanism by which violations of community norms are tracked and punished, the mechanism by which the community knows who is trustworthy and who is not. Gossip is democracy, the original democracy, information about behavior, distributed to everyone so everyone can make informed decisions about who to trust, who to cooperate with, who to avoid. They talked about the world, about the animals, about the plants, about the weather, about the landscape, sharing information, updating each other about what they had seen, what they had found, what had changed. A distributed information system, much more efficient, much more accurate than any single person's observation could be. The conversation of the band was its collective intelligence, the group knowing more than any individual, because everything anyone knew was available to everyone through conversation. They talked about the supernatural, about the spirits, about the animals who had souls, about the ancestors, about the forces that governed the world, about what happened after death, about the meaning of dreams, about the signs and portents that told you what was coming. This was not separate from practical life. It was woven through it. The spiritual and the practical were not in different categories. The knowledge of which plants to avoid was part of the same system as the knowledge of which spirits to propitiate. The knowledge of how to track a deer was part of the same system as the knowledge of the rituals that made the hunt successful. Everything connected in a single worldview that made sense of the whole. Music, the oldest known musical instruments, flutes made from vulture bones and mammoth ivory, found in Germany, dated to approximately 40,000 years ago. But music certainly predates these instruments. Percussion, rhythm, voice. The human body is a percussion instrument. Hands clapping, feet stomping, voice making rhythm. These require no manufactured instrument, and they are universally human. Every human culture has music, has rhythm, has song, without exception. The function of music in the hunter-gatherer band was social, primarily social. Synchronized movement and sound, playing and singing together, created the experience of collective effervescence, a term coined by the sociologist Emile Durkheim, the feeling of being part of something larger, the dissolution of individual boundaries in the shared rhythm, the shared sound, the shared experience, this feeling, this particular feeling of being lifted out of yourself into something collective, larger than yourself, is deeply pleasurable, deeply meaningful, and deeply adaptive because it creates the social bonds that keep the band together, that make cooperation possible, that make sacrifice for the group possible. You will die for someone you are bonded to. Music bonds, dance, the same movement in synchrony with other people, with the beat, with the sound. Dance is not just entertainment. It is the bodily experience of social cohesion, the physical enactment of belonging. Every human culture dances. Every human culture has music. These are not luxuries. They are fundamentals, built into us over millions of years, because they served the most essential function, the creation and maintenance of social bonds, the thing that made survival possible in a world where survival required others. Part 13, territory and travel. The world they moved through, the territory of a hunter-gatherer band, was large, perhaps 500 to 1,000 square kilometers. For a band of 30 people, an enormous area by modern standards, but every part of it known intimately. The knowledge of the territory was encyclopedic. Every significant feature named: the hills, the streams, the water sources, the caves, the rock outcrops, the specific trees, the specific plant communities where the tubers were, in which season where the hunting was good, in which month where the river could be forded, after the rains where the dangerous places were, the cliff edge hidden by vegetation, the quicksand at the river bend, the territory of snakes. Every detail of 1,000 square kilometers held in the memory of 30 people and transmitted through story, through song, through the names of places, each name a compressed story, a memory, a navigation instruction, a warning, seasonal movement. The band did not stay in one place. They moved with the seasons, following the food. The animals that moved, the plants that ripened, the water sources that dried in summer and flowed in winter, the entire territory used in its entirety over the course of a year. This seasonal round, the pattern of movement was known, predictable. Each season, each location, each activity, a repeating pattern. Trade, hunter-gatherers traded not as merchants, not with market economies, but through the exchange networks that connected bands to each other. Objects found in archaeological sites far from their source, ochre, shell ornaments, obsidian volcanic glass that makes excellent cutting tools, found hundreds of kilometers from the nearest volcanic source. These objects traveled through networks of exchange, from band to band, gift giving, alliance building. The exchange of objects was not just economic, it was political, it was social. The gift creates a relationship, creates an obligation, creates an alliance. The shell necklace given to a neighboring band is not a commercial transaction. It is the creation of a relationship that will be reciprocated in some form, at some point, a relationship that can be called upon when times are hard, when help is needed. The network of exchange was the network of survival. Other bands, the relationship with other bands was complex, not simply friendly, not simply hostile. complex. There were bands you were related to through marriage because bands exchanged marriage partners. A woman from this band married into that band. Her family maintained a relationship with the band she left and with the band she joined, creating a web of kinship across the wider region. These kinship ties were the insurance policy, the safety net. If drought reduced the food in your territory, your relatives in another band were obligated to share the same obligation that applied within the band, applied to a lesser extent across bands linked by kinship. Strangers, people from entirely unknown bands, were a different matter. The default response in many hunter-gatherer societies was caution, not necessarily hostility, but caution. A stranger who appeared was watched carefully before being welcomed, before being incorporated into the social world. The word for stranger in many traditional languages is the same as the word for enemy, not because strangers were always enemies, but because the risk was real and had to be managed carefully. Violence. Was it common? This is one of the great debates in anthropology. The peaceful, noble savage versus the brutal, prehistoric warmonger. Neither is accurate. The evidence from skeletal analysis, from isotopic analysis, from studies of modern hunter-gatherers suggests that violence was present, but not constant, not overwhelming. Rates of violent death in prehistoric populations were higher than in modern industrial societies, but comparable to or lower than many historical agricultural societies, and much lower than many people imagine. The war, the organized, sustained territorial war, was largely an agricultural phenomenon, driven by the ownership of fixed resources, lent, stored food, property that could be seized and needed to be defended. Hunter-gatherers had less to fight about and more reasons to avoid it. In a world where survival required cooperation, conflict that disrupted the group was dangerous for everyone. Part 14. The spiritual world, what they believed. Let me be careful here, because we don't know exactly what prehistoric people believed. We can infer from the art, from the burials, from what we know of the spiritual beliefs of modern hunter-gatherer peoples, who share certain features across cultures that seem to reflect something very deep, very ancient. Animism, the belief that everything has a spirit, or an inner life, or a consciousness. The animals, the plants, the rivers, the rocks, the wind, all of it alive, all of it aware, all of it part of a web of relationship that includes humans, but is not centered on humans. Humans are not the point. In an animistic worldview, humans are participants in a vast conversation between beings, of which humans only one kind. This is radically different from the worldview that dominates modern Western culture, in which nature is essentially inert, a resource, a backdrop, a collection of objects that humans are permitted to use for human purposes because humans are the only ones that matter. The animistic worldview makes no such distinction. The deer matters, the oak tree matters, the river matters, the mountain matters, not sentimentally, but as a real acknowledgement that the world is full of agencies, of subjects, of entities with their own interests, their own lives, their own significance. The hunter, before the kill, asked permission from the animal, from the spirit of the animal, from the ancestor of the animal, from whatever power governed the well-being of that species. And after the kill, gave thanks, used every part, wasted nothing, not because waste was economically inefficient, but because the animal had given itself. And that gift required recognition, required gratitude, required care. The relationship between the hunter and the hunted was a relationship, not a transaction. The dream world, dreams were not dismissed, not understood as random neural noise. They were windows into other realities, into the spirit world, into the future, into the knowledge of ancestors. The dream was a communication from the invisible world to the visible one. And the dreamer, the one who had unusual or powerful dreams, might become the shaman, the one who could travel between worlds, who could receive the communications of the spirits and interpret them for the benefit of the community. The plants, some plants were known to alter consciousness, to open the door between the ordinary world and the extraordinary one. The psilocybin mushroom, the peyote cactus, the ayahuasca vine, the fly agaric mushroom, dozens of plants and fungi across every continent that produce altered states of consciousness through their chemistry. And they were used for ritual purposes, for healing, for divination, for the direct experience of what lies beyond ordinary perception. The history of human interaction with psychoactive plants goes back thousands of years, possibly to the deepest roots of human spirituality. The doors of perception that plants can open were doors that our ancestors walked through long before the first city, the first temple, the first written word. Part 15, Love and Sex. The deepest relationships, love, romantic love, is universal, cross-cultural, present in every human society, studied with the same core features: obsessive thinking about the beloved, craving for proximity, heightened emotional response, the willingness to sacrifice, even to die, for the beloved. This is not modern, not bourgeois, not a product of romantic novels or Hollywood films. It is ancient, biological, built into the brain. Through evolutionary processes that go back millions of years, the neuroscience of love is well established. The early stages of romantic love activate the same brain regions as addiction, the reward circuitry, the dopaminergic systems, the craving for more, the obsessive return of the mind to the image of the beloved, the energy, the sleeplessness, the loss of appetite, the euphoria, the anxiety. This is not metaphorical. These are real neurological states that correspond to real measurable changes in brain chemistry, and they are ancient, much older than our species. The same circuits are activated in other pair bonding mammals, vole, prairie voles especially, who form monogamous pair bonds, show the same neurological profile, the same dopamine and oxytocin cascades as human beings in the early stages of love. The pair bond. Not all human societies throughout history have been strictly monogamous, but most have had some form of pair bonding, long-term relationships between specific individuals that involved shared resources, shared care of children, preferential access to a partner. The pair bond in evolutionary terms, made sense because human children require an extraordinarily long period of dependence. More than any other primate, a human child cannot survive without adult care. For years, a decade, the energetic investment of raising a human child is so large that the father's contribution made a significant difference to survival. Pair bonding was likely adaptive for children and for mothers who benefited from having a committed partner to help provision and protect. But the pair bond did not mean the absence of conflict, the absence of betrayal, the absence of jealousy. These are also ancient, also built in. The same brain that falls in love can be consumed by jealousy. The same species that forms pair bonds experiences mate competition, infidelity, the whole complex, turbulent, rich landscape of human sexuality was present 50,000 years ago. The same passions, the same conflicts, the same capacity for love and for the pain that love can bring. Children were valued deeply, not just as future workers or future hunters, as children for themselves. The ethnographic record from modern hunter-gatherer societies describes a profound attachment between parents and children, and between the whole band and the children of the band. Children were not property, not assets. They were beloved, and their deaths were grieved deeply. The evidence of infant burials with care, with ochre, with grave goods, tells us that even the smallest, even the youngest, were mourned, were sent off with love into whatever came next. Part 16, the technology, the tools of 50,000 years ago. The tools, the material culture of humans 50,000 years ago was not primitive. It was sophisticated stone tools. The blade tradition, by 50,000 years ago, humans were making blades, long, thin flakes of flint or obsidian, sharp on both edges, versatile, could be used as knives, as scrapers, as points for spears, as engraveur. The technology for making these blades was highly skilled. Not anyone could do it. It required years of practice, an intimate knowledge of the specific stone being worked, how it fractured, in which directions, under what force. The master flintknapper could look at a nodule of flint and see the blade inside it before striking the first blow. The way a sculptor sees the figure in the marble before cutting, hefting, attaching stone tools to handles, using resin and plant fiber cord or animal sinew, a composite technology that required multiple materials, multiple skills, multiple steps, planning, the knowledge of where to find the resin, how to process it, how to heat it, how to attach the stone, how to wrap the binding, how to test the attachment, a compound tool made from 3 different materials, from different environments. Projectile weapons, the spear with a stone or bone point for throwing or thrusting, the atlatl, the spear thrower, a device that acts as an extension of the arm, allowing a spear to be thrown with greater force and velocity than an arm alone. The bow and arrow, which may have appeared in Africa around 64,000 years ago, long before 50,000 years ago, projectile weapons changed everything. They changed the risk equation of hunting. Instead of approaching a large, dangerous animal close enough to stab, you could kill it from a distance, from safety. The same animal, the same risk, but the risk reduced by the technology, by the thinking that produced it. Clothing, by 50,000 years ago, in colder climates, clothing was essential. Not just comfort, survival, the ability to occupy cold environments that were otherwise uninhabitable, was enabled by clothing, by the ability to process animal hides, to sew. The sewing needle, the oldest known sewing needle, is approximately 50,000 years old, found in Siberia, made from bird bone with a hole for thread, a hole in a bone, made by hand 50,000 years ago. Think about the precision that required. Think about the purpose. Someone in Siberia 50,000 years ago needed to sew, needed to join pieces of hide carefully, tightly, to make a garment that would keep them warm enough to survive the Siberian winter. And they invented the needle, a technology so fundamental that it is still in use in essentially the same form 50,000 years later. Containers, bags made from animal skin, baskets woven from plant fiber, gourds used as water containers. The ability to carry things, to transport food, to carry water, to move possessions was essential for a mobile lifestyle. Boats, by 50,000 years ago, or perhaps 65,000, humans had reached Australia. The only way to reach Australia was across open sea, across a gap of at least 90 kilometers at its narrowest. That required a boat or raft of some kind, seaworthy enough to make a 9-kilometer open ocean crossing, a planned journey, or at least a journey that required technology and navigation and courage. The first seafarers were humans of 65,000 years ago, crossing the open ocean to an unknown land in vessels we have not found. Using navigation skills, we can only infer part 17, art. The first creators' art was present by 50,000 years ago. Art was everywhere, in the caves, on the rocks, on their bodies, in their music, in their stories. Art was not a luxury, not an add-on, not something that happened when everything else was taken care of. Art was fundamental. Personal ornamentation, beads made from shells, from ostrich eggshells, from animal teeth, from seeds, from stones, worn on the body as necklaces, as bracelets, as decorations in the hair. These beads were not just decorative, they were communicative. In a world without writing, without currency, without legal documentation, appearance communicated everything. Who you were, what band you belonged to, what your status was, what alliances you had, whether you were available for marriage or already attached. The beads on your body were your identity, your history, your social position. Visible, readable, by anyone who knew the code. Body paint, red ochre, yellow and white and black pigments applied to the skin for ceremony, for ritual, for the hunt, for the dance. The marked body is the claimed body, the body that says, I belong to this community. I am performing this role. I am participating in this transformation. Body paint was the original costume, the original uniform, the original sacred garment. Cave art, the paintings that have already described, but in the context of daily life. Let me say this. The paintings were not the only art. They were the art that survived. The art on perishable materials, wood, skin, bark, fiber is gone, lost thousands of years ago. What we see in the caves is a fraction, a tiny fraction of the artistic tradition that our ancestors maintained, the tip of an iceberg, most of which melted long ago. Music and dance already described, but in the context of art. Music is art, dance is art. The story told around the fire is art. The arrangement of the camp, the care taken in the making of a tool, the skill applied to the crafting of an object is art. Humans have always made art, not as a hobby, not as a profession, as a mode of being human, as part of how we exist in the world, how we make sense of it, how we communicate within it, how we participate in something larger than ourselves. Part 18, the landscape as sacred space, how the world looked. There was no distinction between the natural and the supernatural. In the worldview of people 50,000 years ago, the world was not divided into the ordinary and the sacred, into the physical and the spiritual, into matter and spirit. These were the same, different aspects of the same reality. The mountain was not just a geological feature, it was a presence, a being with its own character, its own power, its own history. The river was not just water flowing, it was alive with currents and moods and a will of its own. The ancient oak was not just a tree, it was an elder, a witness, a being who had been present through the lives of many generations of human beings who had sheltered under it, who had gathered its acorns, who had told stories about it. The oak remembered, even if humans forgot. Sacred sites, every landscape had places that were particularly powerful, particularly charged, where the membrane between the ordinary world and the spirit world was thinner, where something could be felt that could not be felt elsewhere. These places were known, named, visited for specific purposes: healing, initiation, communication with ancestors, preparation for the hunt, what made a place sacred. Often the unusual, the striking, a spring that emerged from rock, a cliff with a specific echo, a cave that went deep into the earth, a rock formation that looked like something, a place where lightning struck regularly, a place where animals gathered at specific times for unknown reasons. These anomalies, these places where the ordinary rules seemed not to apply, were the sacred sites, the thin places between what was visible and what was not. Part 19, the seasons living with time. Time was not a line. For people 50,000 years ago, time was a circle, a cycle, repeating the year, structured by the seasons, by the solstices and equinox, by the movement of the sun along the horizon, rising further north in summer, further south in winter, by the appearance and disappearance of specific stars, by the behavior of animals, by the flowering of specific plants, by the height of the rivers, by the smell of the air, by 1,000 signals that told you where you were in the cycle. Spring, the return of warmth, the return of migrating animals, the emergence of plants, the time of birth of animals, of energy, of possibility, a time of celebration, of gratitude after the hardship of winter. Summer, the time of abundance, of long days, of full bellies, of fat children, of the storage in the body, in the fat reserves accumulated over months of good eating, of what would be needed in winter. Autumn, the time of harvest, of the final abundance, of the nut harvest, the berry harvest, the last hunts before winter, a time of urgency, of work, of storing, both physically gathering and preparing food and personally building the reserves, the fat, the warmth that would be needed. When the cold came, winter, the lean time, the dark time, the time of sitting close to the fire, of telling the long stories, of sleeping more, of moving less, of the band drawing close together against the cold, against the dark, against the scarcity, the time when the oldest and the youngest were most vulnerable, when the band looked after each other most intensely, when the bonds of the community were tested and proved, the cycle repeated every year, reliably, predictably, the same signals in the same order, the same places, at the same times, the same animals, the same plans. The world was predictable in its cycles, even as it was unpredictable. In its specifics, this year's hunt might fail, but the spring would come, the animals would return, the seasons turned, and you turned with them. Part 20, the inner life, what they felt, what did they feel? This is the question I find myself returning to, again and again. Not what did they do, not what did they believe, but what did they feel? Joy, certainly. The same situations that produce joy in us, produce joy in them. The return of a hunting party, with food, the birth of a healthy child, the reunion with a friend, the first warm day after winter, the successful resolution of a conflict, the beauty of a sunset over a familiar landscape, the pleasure of a good story, well told by a good fire. Joy, in its full variety, was present. Fear, the kind we rarely experience, the direct, bodily, evolutionary fear of a real predator, the sound in the night that might be a lion, the shadow at the edge of the firelight, the unfamiliar prints in the mud that were too large to be any animal you wanted to meet. This fear was a regular companion, not paralyzing, but present, manageable, because it had always been there, because the body knew how to carry it, how to act despite it, how to use it. As information, grief already discussed, but let me say this, grief without the cushioning of modern culture, without the mediated, managed, scheduled grief of funerals and condolence cards and grief counselors. Grief in the immediate, direct, unbuffered presence of the body, of the loss, is something different, something that modern people rarely experience in its full force because we have built so many structures to manage it, to contain it, to keep it from overwhelming. The prehistoric griever had none of those structures. except the community, the people who held you, who cried with you, who stayed near you, who didn't go away until the worst was past. The grief was real, and the community was real, and together they made it survivable. Love for the people around them, for the landscape they lived in, for the animals they depended on, for the specific, particular faces and voices and presences that made up their world. A love born of utter familiarity, of knowing someone completely and being known by them completely, the intimacy of the small group where everything is seen and nothing can be hidden, creates a specific kind of love, imperfect, real, built on long history, and tested by years of shared hardship. Wonder, this above all, the wonder of being alive in a world that was vivid and immediate and fully present in every direction. The wonder of a child maintained into adulthood by a life that never stopped requiring wonder, that never stopped offering things worth wondering at. A world without explanation, where the movements of the stars were mysterious, where the return of the seasons was miraculous, where the birth of a child was terrifying and extraordinary, where the kill of a large animal was charged with gratitude and respect and something that looked like reverence. The world was wonderful, not in the casual, depleted sense that word now carries, but literally full of wonder, full of things worth wondering at. Part 21. What we inherited, the ancient body in the modern world. You are carrying all of this right now, not as a metaphor, as biology, as neurology, as the specific wiring of a brain and body that evolved over millions of years. In the conditions I've been describing, your stress response was designed for a world where stresses were physical, immediate, and brief. A predator, a rival, an injury, your cortisol and adrenaline surge. Your body prepares for fight or flight. The threat passes. Your physiology returns to baseline. That is what the system was designed for. It was not designed for the chronic, low-level, never-ending stresses of modern life, the job insecurity, the mortgage, the social comparison, the newsfeed, the uncertainty about the future. These stresses never resolve. They are always present, and the stress system, designed for brief, intense, resolved threats, cannot handle them well, stays activated for months, for years, producing the physiological damage of chronic stress in a body that was built for acute stress and recovery. Your appetite was designed for a world where food was scarce and variable, where the right response to finding food was to eat as much as possible right now, before someone else did, before it spoiled, before the situation changed. The brain's reward response to food, especially to fat and sugar and salt, the most calorie-dense, the most scarce in the ancestral environment, is powerful because it needed to be eating enough calories to survive lean times, required strong motivation to eat when food was available. Now, in a world where food, especially calorie-dense food, is universally available, that same motivation drives overconsumption. The appetite system was not designed for this world. Your social needs were designed for a world where you were embedded in a group of 30 to 150 people who knew you completely, who you knew completely, whose presence was constant. Your nervous system was calibrated for that level of connection, that level of social input, that level of being known. Modern life, even at its most connected, is radically different. You might have thousands of online connections, but the deep, complete mutual knowledge of the small band, of the people who have known you your whole life, who know your history, your face at every age, your character in all its complexity, that kind of connection is rare in modern life, rarer than it has ever been in the entire history of our species. And the loneliness epidemic, the epidemic of isolation, that characterizes modern industrial societies, is in part the result of bodies and minds designed for deep social embeddedness, living in conditions of profound social thinness. Your immune system was designed for a world full of microbes, full of parasites, full of soil bacteria and animal microbiomes, and water teeming with life. The immune system of a hunter-gatherer was constantly engaged, constantly training against the constant stream of microbial challenge. A constantly trained immune system knows what to attack and what to leave alone. A modern immune system, raised in sterilized environments, deprived of the microbial education it evolved to receive, is an undertrained system that makes mistakes, that attacks things it shouldn't. The self, the autoimmune diseases, the allergies, the inflammatory conditions that are epidemic in modern societies are partly the result of an immune system designed for one world, living in another. Your sleep, we've already discussed this, the biphasic sleep, the night waking, the body's memory of how sleep was designed to work in two pieces, with the night between them. Your need for nature is real, not poetic, not sentimental, biologically real. Studies show that exposure to natural environments reduces cortisol, reduces blood pressure, reduces heart rate, improves mood, improves attention, improves immune function. The Japanese practice of Shinrin-yoku, forest bathing, walking slowly through a forest, breathing the air, is not a wellness fad. It is a return to the environment. The nervous system was calibrated in. The terpenes and other volatile organic compounds released by trees have measurable effects on the immune system, on mood, on the activity of natural killer cells. The body responds to the forest because the body was made for the forest, for the open savanna, for the landscape, for the outdoors, for the specific air and light and sounds of the natural world. This is home. Still, after all the buildings and streets and screens, still, the body knows where it came from. Part 22. The great transition, when everything changed, the transition to agriculture, beginning approximately 10,000 to 12,000 years ago in different places, at different times, was the most important event in human history since the evolution of language. And it was not straightforwardly good for the individuals involved, specifically in the early stages, when the first populations made the transition From hunter-gathering to farming, their health got worse, not better. The bones tell the story. Early agricultural populations compared to hunter-gatherer populations show shorter stature, evidence of nutritional deficiency, higher rates of infectious disease, higher rates of dental cavities, more evidence of hard physical labor, more evidence of specific overuse injuries associated with the repetitive work of agriculture, grinding grain, carrying water, tending animals. Why would people adopt a worse diet and worse health outcomes in exchange for farming? This question puzzled archaeologists for decades. The answer, most researchers now believe, is population. Farming supports higher population densities, more people per unit of land than hunting and gathering. Even if each individual farmer is less healthy than each individual hunter-gatherer, the total population can be larger, and in the competition between groups, numbers matter. Groups of farmers could produce enough people to outcompete groups of hunter-gatherers. Even if each farmer was less robust than each hunter-gatherer, agriculture was not better for the individual. In the early stages, it was better for the group, for the persistence and expansion of the farming population at the expense of the hunting and gathering population. The story of the last 10,000 years is largely the story of the agricultural expansion replacing, absorbing, or destroying the hunter-gatherer populations that preceded it, not because farming was biologically superior, but because it was demographically productive, and demographic pressure over centuries and millennia is one of the most powerful forces in human history. The hunter-gatherers who were displaced or assimilated were not less evolved, not less intelligent, not less human. They were the same species, the same brain, the same capacity, but living in a system that could not produce the numbers that the farming system produced, and numbers in the end prevailed. We are the descendants of both of the farmers who multiplied and of the hunter-gatherers who were absorbed. The DNA of modern humans carries the traces of both, and the body, the actual physical body, still carries the adaptations of the hunter-gatherer, still has the immune system, the gut, the sleep pattern, the stress response, the social needs of a creature that lived very differently from the way we live now. Part 23, the return, what this means for you tonight. You are not so far from them, not in time. 50,000 years sounds like a lot, but in biological terms, in evolutionary terms, 50,000 years is nothing. Evolution works on timescales of tens of thousands to millions of years. For significant change, 50,000 years is not enough. To change the hardware, your brain is the same brain, your body is the same body, your needs, your fears, your joys, your social requirements, your relationship with darkness and fire and the natural world are the same as theirs, not in experience. Think about the last time you sat around a fire, even a campfire or a fireplace, and felt something specific, something that isn't there when you sit in front of a television or a computer screen. Even though both produce light and warmth, the fire produces something else, a specific quality of attention, of relaxation, of being drawn in without being stimulated. Hypnotic. ERC. Ancien. Research suggests that fire watching in humans produces a specific physiological response, a reduction in blood pressure, a deepening of the relaxation response, not the stimulation of a screen, but the specific ancient embodied relaxation of watching something that has been part of every human evening for 1,000,000 years, not in need. You still need what they needed: community, meaning, movement, the natural world, sleep, food that nourishes you, the experience of being known completely by people who stay. These needs are not new. They're not modern. They are the needs of the animal you are, the animal that evolved in the band, around the fire, under the stars. That is who you are, underneath everything else. Final section. The long, quiet coming home. Lie still for a moment and imagine this: a dark hillside somewhere in Africa, or Europe, or Asia, or Australia, 50,000 years ago. A small group of people, 20, 30, around the fire burning low now, the day's work done, the food eaten, the children asleep, the adults talking quietly or not talking, just sitting in the warmth, in the light, looking into the fire, the way humans have always looked into fire for 1,000,000 years. Above them, the sky, the Milky Way, blazing in a darkness that is absolute. The stars so bright, they cast faint shadows. And around the fire, the sounds, the night sounds, the insects, the distant call of a bird, the movement in the dark at the edge of the firelight, and the people looking into the fire, feeling what people have always felt around the fire. At the end of the day, at rest, warmth, safety, connection, the particular peace of being held by the people who know you in a place you know, under the sky, that has always been there, will always be there. You are not so different from them, not really. Underneath all the complexity, the technology, the speed, the noise, the screens, you are the same animal with the same needs, the same fears, the same capacity for love and grief and wonder. And tonight, you are doing what they always did. After the fire burned low, after the stories were told, after the day was done, you are resting. Your body knows this rhythm, has always known it. The long breath, the slow settling, the gradual withdrawal from the day into the dark, into the quiet, into sleep. If you wake at 2 a.m. in the silence, in the dark, remember, this is not failure. This is the first sleep ending and the night watch beginning, the time for the thoughts that surface only in the deep quiet, the time for whatever your mind needs to work through without the noise of the day. Let it do its work. The second sleep will come. It always does. Your body knows. Right now, the fire's low, the stars are out, the people who love you are nearby, even if they are in other rooms, in other houses, they are nearby. You are not alone. In the dark, rest now. The way your ancestors rested 50,000 years ago, under the same stars, with the same body, with the same capacity for love and wonder and the particular peace of a day done, and a night that will hold you until morning. Close your eyes. The fire is burning. Someone is watching. You are safe. You always were.